Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program tonight, the new information technology norms in India and their implications for the right to privacy and the right to expression in our country. This on a day when WhatsApp has gone to court against the government. What are the new norms and how is this all profoundly linked with your right to express what you want safely? Also on the program tonight, the cyclone which has now made landfall several hours back, Cyclone Yas. What has the impact been? The Director General of the National Disaster Relief Force will be joining us. Several low-lying areas in Bengal have been inundated, Odisha as well. We'll bring you the latest images and what exactly the situation is. But first, let's focus a little bit on the new IT laws in this country. What exactly does this imply for the Twitters or Facebooks or WhatsApp? It's very, very important because it could actually change the way you and I use social media or Twitter for that matter. So it's a debate of privacy versus security. The government says that they need to know more information. The new IT rules were issued in February this year, and companies were given 3 months to ensure that these were absolutely enforced. So what is this actually about? The new rules define government control over the social media platforms, right? For example, Twitter, Oku, OTT, Netflix, digital news platforms as well. And therefore, Facebook and Twitter were among others who were given a deadline to comply. So what specifically did they need to comply on? How are things going to be different from them? I'll explain to you. Now, firstly, the deadline ended today, and therefore this is now a rule. The rules have been applied to so-called social media intermediaries for starters. Social media intermediaries apply to, for example, Twitter and what they host on the Twitter site, what people post over there. WhatsApp or Facebook are also called intermediaries. They are part of what people post and place over there as well. So let's keep that word intermediaries in mind. Intermediaries in the past had immunity. They were not liable for content. In other words, what you posted on Twitter or what you posted on WhatsApp to exchange that information was something that WhatsApp or Facebook or Twitter couldn't control necessarily, and they were not legally liable for that. Now they can be if there is control which the government puts over them. Now, users will be warned against anything illegal. For example, on Twitter, they'll be told you cannot post this, and Twitter needs to tell you. There needs to be faster cooperation with law enforcement. Data retention period needs to be doubled. In other words, these companies need to ensure that they have the data to enable the government to try and get more information on who is posting what. And teams must be in place. WhatsApp teams must be in place. Facebook and Twitter teams to cooperate with law enforcement almost on a constant basis. Now, why is this happening? This will enable verification of the message originator. That's what the government wants. So if there is somebody who has posted something on Twitter but goes by an anonymous identity, the government may want to know who that person is. Similarly, on WhatsApp, if there is something which the government finds objectionable, they may want WhatsApp to tell them who has originated that message, who has started out that message. And as we will explain to you now, that in fact is deeply problematic, because the verification of the message originator goes against the basic technology or the basic premise upon something which a signal, a telegram or a WhatsApp works, which is end-to-end encryption. That means neither WhatsApp nor Facebook, which owns WhatsApp, will actually know what person A is saying to person B, because it is a secure communication between the two. So therefore, if the government says no, we may need to know, then that secret conversation you may be having with your friend may no longer be secret at all. So the new rules say enable verification of the message originator. Who has started out this message? So the identity of the person gets known. Deploy tech measures to identify sexual violence. So this is absolutely important. There must be technology to bring down sexual violence, issues of abuse, sexual abuse very, very quickly. So the government wants that to happen. But there are a couple of important rules over here which could also be problematic. Rule 4.2 says the app must trace the first originator of any message. Now WhatsApp says that we cannot do that because the way it is designed, we do not necessarily know where that first message has come from. We do not know the identity of that person, is what they are saying. And they cannot reveal it. That goes against their basic philosophy. So, all in all, Rule 4.2, does this undermine end-to-end encryption, what I was talking about? And does this therefore threaten your right to privacy? Does this threaten your freedom of speech? What is it that you can and cannot post? You post something, the government tells Twitter, you need to take it down in a finite period of time, then is that not a threat to your freedom of speech? Rule 4, automation to identify and take down harmful content. This is in a sense very welcome. You do not want crazy, rabid, dangerous things on a platform, for example, like Coup or Twitter. And there must be automation to take down something which, for example, is a sexual threat or a sexual innuendo, which is completely unacceptable. But the worry is, while that would be a great and a wonderful, laudable goal, the fear is that harmful content may not necessarily be that well defined, and that there could be a creep to other areas with this automation. Who defines what exactly is harmful? Will the government throw the kitchen sink to try and get certain posts to be removed? For example, what we've seen during the farmer protests. So, is this function creep? In other words, automation, yes, but will this mean that some essential messages might actually end up getting thrown away or tossed aside because companies no longer have a choice? Joining us now to look at this, Pinky Anand, former Additional Solicitor General of India. Thanks very much for being with us. Apar Gupta, the lawyer and Executive Director of Internet Freedom Foundation, also with us. N.S. Napinai is a Supreme Court advocate and founder of Cyber Sathi, joins us as well. Ms. Anand, let me come across to you first. The real worry is that the government could ensure, would be deciding what is acceptable and what is not acceptable well beyond the strict purview of what it should be doing. So to say national security and, for example, apply it on anything and everything. To say sovereignty of India is being attacked and then place it on anything and everything. So the worry is, should the government have so many rights? Is that a challenge? Your views on that?
See, basically, the question of people's worry and the organization's worry is not what is of immediate concern. I think the real question and issue is the government entitled to? Is the government empowered to? Can the government do it? Does it violate the constitutional tests? And in the present case, what the rules have been made for purposes of ensuring that fake news, hate speech, crime against women, sexual violence, as you mentioned, each of these features, the security of the nation, the sovereignty of the nation, nothing, even privacy is not absolute. I mean, Puttaswamy's judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in terms ultimately says that the courts have to look at certain criteria when judging this issue. But aside from that, it is not an absolute right. And it is always open to the government or the authorities to actually impose any conditions as long as they pass the particular tests in question. So I think that is where the ballpark lies. And I suppose we'll have to see, what you need to see rather, is the fact whether the rules ensure some action to be taken. And I must point out one feature to you while we speak. As we speak, Facebook has in fact made a statement that it proposes to comply with the rules, and it needs some time to put that entire procedure into place. Of course, it's also suggested that it should have certain discussions in order to put forth certain systems, because apparently it is a mammoth task and requires a considerable amount of, not that it cannot be done, it can be done, that is what the contention appears to be, but there's a lot more work that needs to be put into that entire process, as well as people, as well as technology. So the real situation here is, do we have the position today in IT to allow each and every part of fake news, hate news, crime against women to be displaced openly? I'll tell you one other issue, for example, which was coming across at various times, a subject of child pornography.
Yeah.
And the whole question was, can you allow anything to go past on media, social media forums without any interdiction? And therefore, the entire question of how should you be able to do that? And this is the reason the rules have been brought into place, to allow the government and allow the authorities, and look at the way it's happening.
Sure.
You have a 3-tier grievance redressal system. So you start from the portal, you go on to the oversight committee, the interministerial, and then you go to the oversight committee finally. So you have these systems put into place to actually go into it. As I said, concerns are raised. It's always so. Everybody wants to be able to do exactly what they want and how they want to do. But in the question of these national interests, is it something that is feasible? Is it something that is of concern?
All right.
That is, I think, the real question.
Mr. Apinai, one of the other concerns is encryption itself. Encryption is a huge benefit for people to have conversations they want, for their confidentiality, for their privacy to be ensured. On the other hand, what Pinky Anand suggests, that there are certain circumstances in which the government, legal agencies need to find out. At the moment, that cannot happen that easily. So what's the solution? How does one fight through to find a solution to this?
So Vishnu, there are actually a few things. The first issue actually is encryption required to be broken at all in terms of the 4-2 rule? According to me, I think that may be a little misleading to assume that if a compliance is needed, then encryption necessarily ought to be broken. I don't believe that's how it works. Secondly, if you look at the 4-2 rule itself, which is the first originator rule, that is predicated on two things. One is a judicial order. So with or without the rule, once a judicial order is passed, any organization will necessarily have to comply with.
Right.
The second part is the contentious issue, which is the order which is supported by Section 69. So when you look at 69 of the IT Act, that section itself specifically says that no corporate entity can decrypt data unless and until an order for decryption is passed, and such order has to be based on reasonable cause.
Right.
And it should be the last resort and not the first resort.
Okay.
Now, all these are checks and balances which are put in place in the provision itself. I won't say Section 4.2 by itself is fully fine. There are a lot of issues, and for me, this is the crux of the issue, which is at what time are you asking for tracing of first originator? If it is constant, if it is a continuous tracing that you're expecting, the other thing that Puttaswamy also pointed out was proportionality and any actions which is backed by law. Law itself says that you can't subject people to surveillance or continuous surveillance without reasonable cause.
Okay.
So you can't have continuous tracing of first originator. If it is at the time when the notice is issued, then the issues become very different. It's not about legality, but practicality. That is something that corporates will have to necessarily address.
Okay,
but
all right. I just want to go across. I take your point, Ms. Napina. I just want to go across to Apar as well. Apar, one of the rules are that in 36 hours, the intermediaries need to comply and take down whatever needs to be taken down as per the government. Now, is it not unfair that if the government wants content to be taken down of, say, a Facebook, that they can immediately get that done, but the person who puts up that content doesn't necessarily have that same time for appeal within this system?
So, Vishnu, specifically on the time periods with respect to your request to a platform to take it down, if it's violated some part of a provision of law, or has even resulted in what is very common today is trolling, there is a good sense of balance struck by the Supreme Court in the Shreya Singhal judgment.
Right.
The court, and this is opinion of Justice Nariman, says that because there are so many people with very different social attitudes, they will talk to each other in very diverse ways, and quite often there will be disagreement. Now, given the millions of users, there will be thousands of requests which go to these platforms every day, and only content which is illegal needs to be taken down. And who will judge that legality will be a police department or it will be a court. Now, when a court or a police department sends this notice, there's a presumption that they have applied themselves and have actually judged that there is something we need to look at, and this needs to be taken down, which is why there is a distinction in this timeline, where I, as an individual user, if I make a complaint to a social media platform, the only part which is applicable are the terms of service, which are the guidelines, for instance, on Twitter. And Twitter determines that as per itself, whether it is legal or illegal. But if a law enforcement agency or a court sends a notice, it needs to act in a much quicker way. However, these timelines by itself, to some extent, may not be practically justifiable even when notices are sent by courts or by police stations, because sometimes these notices are vague. Further clarity is required. Sometimes they're overbroad. For instance, the blocking request which was sent a few months ago by the government of India, requiring close to more than 200 more accounts to be disabled.
Yes.
And these are not individual tweets, and also included the accounts of publications such as the Caravan.
Right. No, and Ms. Anand, just the last word to you on this. That is actually the ultimate worry, that, you know, if there are efforts to shut down, for example, the media or independent journalists, or opinions which you can consider, which many would say is just dissent or disagreement, that is what the worry is, that is how it may be applied. We've seen what happened during the farmer protests.
See, I don't think this is the manner in which anything can be ever discussed, and it shouldn't be. You can't say that because it is a tendency, or because it may be, or because it is a possibility of doing. Therefore, every law, when made, is good. Every rule that is made is good. You can't assume the worst in any scenario to say it is going to be contrarian otherwise. So I think that you will have to leave to other situation. Whenever we go into a matter of lawmaking, or what it does is, can you make that law? Is that law workable? And it stops at that. You cannot ever consider that a law is going to be utilized or misutilized. You assume it's going to be utilized. The rest, time will tell.
All right. Well, let's hope that time does tell, that these laws actually target the people who need to be targeted, those who are proponents of hate and crime, and not those who just want secure conversation. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. Joining us now, a very special guest, Aprameya Radhakrishnan, the co-founder and CEO of Coup. Coup many see to be the Indian Twitter. Good to speak to you, Aprameya. It's a big day for you. You have a smile on your face, but are you a bit apprehensive? Because let's face it, complying with these will be difficult. It's not that easy for you, is it?
Well, when we went through the guidelines, when they were passed, we found that, it is necessary to keep the users happy and reassure them of the safety for using internet and social media, right? Like, you allow everybody to, come onto the road and drive their cars and ride their bikes. And there will always be rules that you will have to follow.
That really what the problem is, that within 36 hours, as per the new rules, you would need to enforce a takedown. Is there any time left for someone to appeal this?
So we are a India registered company where Indian citizens, all companies, whether it's media or otherwise, have to, comply with the law of the land. So we will comply with the law of the land. And if the person has, has a problem with the kind of decision that has been taken by any authority, there are already places that they can go and get a redressal for that separately, right? So it's not that, Coup is taking a judgment.
But the point is that and the basis of this, the basis of the argument is that the freedom of expression, the freedom of free speech could in fact be stifled if the government were to decide, right, that the sovereignty of India is being threatened by certain posts. And then in the recent past, when the farmer protests were going on, they felt that Greta Thunberg and others were compromising or affecting the potential sovereignty of India, and you are told to take that down. Many would say that that's a bit extreme.
Yeah, so as a platform, we are not the judge. We are not the court. We are not the elected representative. We are not the right body to take a judgment on whether to keep that or not.
Okay.
Right? We are a technology company which is enabling a stage, giving a mic, right? What is being told? The country already, like if you book a hall and you have an audience and you're speaking something. So we are the hall, we are the mic, right? What is being said? If somebody gets offended in an offline setup, they will go and complain to somebody, right?
The government comes to you and says, take this down, this is deemed to be illegal for whatever the reason may be. But then if a private citizen is constantly abused on Coup, in any which way, as we know that happens all the time, they can appeal to you, and somehow you are not obliged to take that down in 36 hours or 72 hours or whatever it may be. So isn't that a bit of a mismatch? The common citizen and his or her power versus the power of the government.
No, I think building a healthy ecosystem in the in India for social media use is has three pillars, right? There is the government, there is the user, and there is the platform. I think it has to be a constant dialogue between all three parties and make sure that we are moving towards what is a safe ecosystem for the user. The user triumphs all the time.
One or two other questions. Firstly, the use of artificial intelligence or automated tools to ensure that some of the worst content goes away. Child sexual abuse material, stuff depicting rape. This is absolutely essential. It just has to go away instantly.
Yes.
Nobody should.
Yes.
It's illegal by any standard of humanity.
Absolutely.
But while that is so very important, isn't the worry which has been stated is that this could, the function itself could creep into being used to take down other content which shouldn't be taken down?
Not at all. Again, we even in the content that is iffy, right? Most of it is in black and white, right? You can take easy decisions. You can make machines learn to take those easy decisions, right? In certain cases which are gray, we also are constituting an advisory board which will include eminent people who will help us navigate the gray, even if we don't get any request from anybody else to take it down, right? And there is an elected representative who is also looking at what is happening and what is not happening.
One final question to you. You aren't worried about a scenario where you're inundated by requests from the government to pull down content?
No, it's not happened so far. We're a small company, and as I said, constant dialogue will always help. We are always for the user. We're for freedom of speech, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the offenders don't spoil the experience for the 99% and more good users.
All right. Aprameya Radhakrishnan, co-founder and CEO of Co. Great speaking to you. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, the other big story, the cyclone which has hit the eastern seaboard over Orissa, parts of West Bengal, it's now in the direction after making landfall towards Jharkhand. Cyclone Yas joining us now to talk a little bit about the rescue and relief operations, the Director General of the National Disaster Relief Force. Thanks, Mr. Pradhan, very much for being with us. Firstly, do you have an idea at this stage of the number of people who may have lost their lives in Bengal, Orissa, or elsewhere?
Actually, as we speak, the estimates are coming in, but of the damage to life and property. But Vishnu, I think the exact numbers are still to come in. They will trickle in, as is always the case, a little later, probably by tomorrow. But I get a sense that it has been minimal. It has been close to as low as possible, zero probably. But it should be somewhere in the region of a single digit, or maybe just over 10 or 12 at best. So that I think is the best case scenario as far as I am concerned. But let's wait and see for the final figures to come in.
Well, let's just hope and pray that that does remain the case. So that's fantastic news. It's an idea of how well the evacuations, besides anything else, has taken place. In terms of the path of damage that you're seeing right now and storm activity, residual storm activity right now, what are you being told? Is it moving towards Jharkhand presently?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it is not only moving towards, it is partially moved towards Jharkhand, and there has been effect felt in cities like Jamshedpur and Saraikela, and even in Chaibasa. So there have been trees uprooted and hoardings damaged in Jamshedpur city. So I think the systems have moved towards Jharkhand, and probably it will completely move towards Jharkhand in the next couple of hours. After which it will turn into, I'm told by the IMD that probably late night or after midnight, it will turn into a deep depression, which will probably then go into a depression mode, and then it will fizzle out. So I think the worst impact time is done and dusted, I would say. But now it is time to take stock of what exactly has been the damage to life and property.
And could you give us an idea of those low-lying areas which have been inundated? We saw some pictures in parts of Bengal. So has Bengal been particularly hit in low-lying areas in terms of property areas inundated?
Well, that has become probable because of the high tide situation and the full moon combination, which is a coincidence of sorts. But that has certainly added to the impact of the inundation and the water, the flooding of the villages, coastal villages, both in Odisha and in West Bengal, but probably a little more in West Bengal because of the low-lying physiology of the geography of the area. And so that's why I'm told that the water which has come in has not receded in many parts of the lower, villages, low-lying villages in the coastal areas of West Bengal. While the water that has come in Balasore and Dhamra area in the eastern coast of Odisha, that has gone down quite a bit.
Right.
So while there has been inundation, but there has been a change of character in both the places.
All right, Mr. Pradhan, thank you so much for sharing all of those details with us. Hopefully that loss to life will be minimal, and we'll have to assess that damage on the ground. That might take a few days. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us, the Director General of the NDRF, the National Disaster Relief Force, which has done a great deal of work in situations like this over the last many years. We're going to take a short break. My colleague Sanket Upadhyay comes up next.